Welcome to the Cary Podcast. It's a podcast about Cary. Now here is your host, Matthew Corey.
Thanks, Ted. I hope everyone is doing well. Greg Fishel is back for another episode, and we are going to talk about the weather, specifically climate change. Now, don't freak out. We aren't going to get all doom and gloom or blame one political party or the other. One of the main goals I have with this podcast is to bring people together, and that's what I want to do with this episode as well. My agenda here is that I don't want to see your home get destroyed, and I want to see a healthy environment on the planet for our children and their children to be able to live on. Floodwaters don't care who you voted for. Wildfires don't care what news channel you watch. Since I know this can be a sensitive topic for some people, there is no advertiser on this episode. Regardless of your thoughts on the matter, I hope you enjoy our conversation. We kind of go off the rails a little at some points, but there's a reason I do this show for free, people. We are back again with the one and only Greg Fishel, meteorologist from WRAL for almost 40 years, right? Like 38 years?
Yep.
You were there 19 years before the turn of the century and 19 years after the turn of the century.
I'm really into symmetry, you know?
All right, that works. That's the real reason why you left, right? You were counting it down like now.
Now is the time, yeah.
Magic number 19. All right, so today we're going to have kind of a more serious conversation. It's gotten so much hotter. We've had so many days in the high 90s and breaking 100. You know, you look on the news and you see all these really horrible weather events happening all over the country and all over the world and other places. And I know climate change has been happening for a while. I mean, climate change technically has been happening since the planet began.
Yes, that's right.
The big question now is it a matter of man-made climate change? And like mainly one of the big culprits is the emissions from cars and coal plants. A lot of the greenhouse gases, as they say, getting into the atmosphere. And there's a camp that says, no, there's no such thing as man-made climate change. And ironically, a lot of those people also have an interest in the oil and gas industry. And then there's the pro-human-made climate change. And a lot of those people have interests in solar and wind farms and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a man of science and you're also a man of faith.
Right.
And everyone says someone's being paid to say whatever. No one's paying you. Like if a bunch of solar panels get sold, you don't get a check.
No, I don't.
And if a bunch of oil gets drilled, you don't get a check.
Nope.
So and technically you are associated with the air conditioning company Blanton's. So more heat means more air conditioning. So there's that. But
right.
As long as I've known you, nothing has influenced your opinion of climate and weather.
No, I was a skeptic for 30 years. Basically from when I first got out of college, which would have been around 1979, until around the year maybe 2010. And I woke up one morning, and I kid about the fact that in of itself that was a good thing. And I realized that I was allowing my political ideology at the time to dictate my opinion about a science issue, and that was not correct. Ideologies and science don't mix. And so once I actually started reading the peer-reviewed literature, talking to the scientists who were doing the research, even going back to my old textbooks, it became impossible for me to make the argument that we weren't having any effect. Maybe we could still argue about how much, but to say that we were having no effect didn't resonate with me anymore. Now, I have become increasingly disillusioned with the political division on this and many, many issues in our world today. And I almost feel like we no longer have a two-party system in this country. We have a two-cult system. And that there have been studies that have been done that if all you do is hang out with people of like mind, your position becomes more and more extreme. We've lost the ability as a society, in my view, to engage in constructive conversations with people of differing views. And
Absolutely, yeah.
And to acknowledge even the remotest of possibilities that we might learn something from them. And there are even people on quote unquote my side of this argument that cause me to tremble a bit. There have always been unusual weather events. Okay, that's nothing new. The trick is, or the goal is to separate that out that happens naturally and then see what you have left. But this immediate attribution that I see going on to some major weather events that, oh, this is another example of climate change, you don't know that for sure. It might have happened anyways, okay? But what I do tell people is that, yes, the climate has changed ever since time began. Yes, it has been hotter than it is now in the Earth's history. Yes, there has been more CO2 in the air than there is now in the Earth's history. All of that is true. We simply have never seen these changes occur on such a short time scale. These are usually things that transpire over, thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. And, we've seen pretty significant changes in just, a century and a half. Now, I hope I'm not rambling here, but there are such things as low probability, high impact events. So let's just suppose that your opinion is that the chance of catastrophic climate change is small, okay? It's one of those things where if you may view it as a low probability, but if it happens, there's no going back. It's like a tornado warning. The chance of a tornado coming down your street to your house, even if you're under a warning, is very small. But if it happens and you're not prepared, it's over. And so there's a professor up at MIT who's now retired, but he was a giant in our field, still is. And I love his approach to it. He said, it all comes down to risk assessment. And he said, we all know what that is because we get in the car to go to work in the morning. We assess the risk of being in an accident. Most times we accept that risk. But if there's a way to minimize the risk without harming people, why isn't that something we could all agree on? And I will say this, and this is probably going to make some people mad, but if we cut into the oil industry's $1 billion of profit just a little bit, I don't consider that to be hurting people. I think I'm getting beyond the science issue here, but I think we've forgotten in large part that we're all Americans. We may have a D or an R behind our name when we vote, but we're still all Americans, and I don't see one side as being more patriotic or more loyal to the United States than another side. Just have different ideas as how to go about getting things done. And if we sat down and talked about this stuff, we might actually be able to come up with a solution. Like, for instance, gun control. Every time there's a shooting, it comes down to Second Amendment rights versus gun control. Okay? Wouldn't it be interesting if everybody would get together and say, you know what, maybe there's a third solution we haven't thought of?
Well, I think too many people make too much money on the argument to let the argument go away.
Right.
And so they got to keep the argument going so they can keep their website clicks going or their online views or their cable news advertising rates, all that stuff. When people get along, it's bad for ratings.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And I have often said that I think between cable news channels, talk radio, and social media, that everybody has an echo chamber they can run to now to hear what they want to hear and see what they want to see.
Yep.
And you're right. I think the goal of a lot of these folks is to divide the country and keep it divided. And it's a shame. I think if Walter Cronkite or David Brinkley were alive today, I think they'd be rolling over in their grave at what journalism has become.
Now, I have friends and family that fall on both camps here and there, but you'll get things like every time it snows somewhere, someone will be like, "Oh yeah, global warming, sure."
Right.
And, it's like, well, no, that's not how it works. That's the weather. Climate is all the weather, not just is it raining today.
You're right.
And
You're
then
right.
you get the other people like every time we see a hurricane or the heat waves, the droughts. Now, things like air quality, that's not really weather on its own, right? That's pretty much pollution related, right?
Right, right. Of course, weather plays a role in the transport of that pollution, from one location to another, or trapping it. Like if you get one of these huge ridges sitting over you in the upper atmosphere where the winds are really light all the way up through the atmosphere, stuff just doesn't move, and so that can obviously be a problem. But you're right, there's more to it than just the weather.
Yeah, and we live in a soundbite world now where everybody wants to see the one line quick explanation, and certain media outlets will give you that quick explanation. It may not be correct, but if everyone on that channel goes along with it, that's what everybody believes in that camp. So what can we kind of expect to see as far as like the climate here in central North Carolina? I mean, I don't remember summers being nearly this hot when I was little. Yes, it got hot, but I've heard it doesn't cool down at night as much as it did.
And that is one of the signals of climate change, in the sense that in a warmer environment, you have more water vapor present. And water vapor is a greenhouse gas. And so it intercepts outgoing radiation from the earth and sends it back. And so the more water vapor you have, the warmer your nights are going to get. And so, that's a clear signal. Now, I just had one of those thoughts and it immediately raced. I just did a scathing Facebook post tonight, just to be fair here. The temperature at the RDU airport has reached a point now where something has to be done. Today, for instance, they reported, on the day of this recording, they recorded a high of 102. And at the National Weather Service office on Centennial campus, it was 95. 7-degree difference. There was nobody in the state that was within 4 degrees of the airport.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that's jet exhaust, air being heated over the runway and blown toward the sensor, dead grass around the sensor, I don't know, because I'm not there. But I do know that there's something dreadfully wrong with the accuracy of these readings. And of course, there are going to be some people are going to say, "Oh, well, it's a government conspiracy. They cherry pick these hot places to make their argument." And nothing could be farther from the truth. There's a group called the National Center for Environmental Information, and they have observations all over the world, and they are very, very conscious of quality control. Like if they look at one reading and they see everything around it is inconsistent with that, they throw it out. And so they go to painstaking measures to make sure there are no biases in the temperature record. But yet I have talked to people that are convinced that this is all a massive government conspiracy to promote their agenda. And a lot of times my response to that is, okay, it's one thing to accuse the United States government of being in cahoots. And how many times have you ever seen the US government so organized that they could pull that off? But then it's something else to say, is there a chance that every scientist in the world, or 99% of the scientists in the world, are all involved in this conspiracy to promote climate change? What do you think the chances are of that?
I mean, people think scientists, and they think of people in white coats, and they all work for some mysterious James Bond villain or something. But no, there's multiple different places that scientists work. They're all they get paid from different companies, some government things, some private. So no, they're not all going to be on the same page about some big conspiracy. And the other thing that for people that think it's a big government conspiracy, like it's the same government that couldn't build the website a few years ago. So, they get mocked for not being able to do that, and then they get villainized for the evil that apparently they can pull together for something like this.
Right.
And things like temperature readings may be up, but things like the Arctic ice disappearing.
Yes.
That's not an airport too close. That's not jet exhaust. That's gone.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the thing about it is you don't have to rely on these anomalous occurrences like we see at the RDU airport. There's plenty of other data that is very legitimate and all points in the same direction. And, the Arctic sea ice, I think that the all-time record low, I think, was in the year either 2011 or 2012, but we haven't been that far away from that, this year. And again, I think it's one of those things where, this may not turn into a calamity during our lifetime. I don't know. I'm a lot older than you are, so, time's running out from my perspective. But I still think it's one of those things where, and if you look at it from a faith argument that, we have been commanded to be good stewards of the planet. And nobody is saying that CO2 is inherently evil. I mean, CO2 and other greenhouse gases and the burning of those fossil fuels afforded us enormous opportunities in the 20th century to advance. And no one should forget that. But, as time moves on, you evolve and you learn and you find better ways to do things. And that's all that's happened here, is that we have found out, through careful observation that, a lot of people don't know that without the natural amount of CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide, the Earth would be 60 degrees Fahrenheit colder and would be an uninhabitable ice ball. So if a small percentage of gases can be the difference between life and death on our planet, does it not make sense that doubling that at least has the potential to also have a serious impact?
It makes a lot of sense. I think, the burning of fossil fuels, it did help us a lot, but it also made very rich and powerful industries that I think they hold back a lot of the technologies from moving forward because a Tesla doesn't use gas.
Right.
And so, or, other electric cars. But the more electric cars, the less gas they're going to sell. And, if they're already rich and powerful and making a lot of campaign donations to our congressmen and other politicians, we see things hang on a lot longer than they should.
I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. And things always evolve. I mean, it's not that anybody has it in for a certain industry. It's just that, we keep finding better ways to do things. And sometimes there's fallout from that. You could make the argument that, and I don't know if you or anybody else agrees with this, but a lot of people think that local television news is going to eventually die because it's so easy now to get information in other ways. I mean, you don't have to be sitting in front of your TV set at 6 o'clock anymore to get news. You can get it anytime you want from anywhere you want.
Yep, point and click. And you can get the type of news that you want too.
Right. Exactly.
The news is like church now. It's like, well, I want to believe this, so I'm going to watch this news.
Right. No, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And so, from that argument, maybe I got out of TV at the right time. I mean, I know I got into it at the right time because it was about 1979 or 1980 when TV stations started embracing the idea of hiring a degreed meteorologist instead of having a weather announcer.
Yeah.
I could not have timed that better if I had tried. And now, with all of the internet and all those things, could very well be that I got out of it at exactly the right time.
Yeah, I mean, as more companies, or I guess a few companies, buy up more and more of the stations around the country, they consolidate things. It's like what they did with newspapers and radio stations. Things get consolidated, and then one market will end up producing a newscast that's going to air in another city because they're both owned by the same parent company, and you don't have a whole lot of localism anymore.
Right. Exactly. And, one thing, and I don't know why this thought popped into my mind right now, but, Jim Goodman, who was the owner of Capital Broadcasting for many, many years, was considered to be a true visionary, that he could see the way things were going to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road that a lot of people couldn't. And a lot of people still don't know that RAL was the first station in the country to broadcast in high definition.
Yep.
And logic would tell you that should have been in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or someplace like that.
It happened here.
Yeah. He basically said, if not now, when, and if not who, or if not us, who. And I'll never forget, the night that I think we had our first high definition newscast. I think it was back in like 2001, maybe something like that.
I think so. It was at the state fair.
Okay.
And we had a remote truck that was high def to do the broadcast. I was at the station. I was working on the crew that did the 5:30 news.
Okay.
So after we had this big history-making newscast from 5 to 5:30, live, high definition, all HD from the state fair, first time ever. They came back at 5:30, and we got to take over to go back to standard definition. It was kind of like being on the crew of Apollo 12. But, yeah, that was a big day at the station. I remember that.
And do you know, this is sort of a funny thing I remember, is that when we were in front of the green wall, we had television monitors to our right and to our left that we could look at to make sure we were pointing at the right things. Well, those television monitors were still in, let's see, I'm trying to think. Maybe you can help me with this. There were black borders on each side. And so I guess it was in what, standard?
Yeah, originally the old studio, the old weather wall.
And so all I know is that there was a certain place I could stand where nobody could see me if they were watching, I guess, in standard depth. And so I kidded about the fact that if I wanted to send secret messages to anybody without anybody knowing, then that was the place I should stand.
Yeah, because the high definition TVs were wider. And so,
Right.
I remember we had the little safe title things where we knew this was, it's like in the old days of the VHS movies where occasionally you would get one it was called letterboxed, and it would have like the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen, but it was the same picture aspect ratio that they showed in the movie theater, because movie theater screens were a lot wider than TV screens.
Right.
And so, if you stood in that little extra spot, you could send your coded messages to, I think, the 7 people in Raleigh at that time that had a high definition TV.
Yeah, because that really wasn't, and I remember Jim had an incentive for the employees that I think he offered us like an interest-free loan.
Yep.
To purchase our own HD television. And I remember the first one I got was really heavy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, and then of course, everything evolved into the flat screen and all that sort of stuff. But
now you hang them on your wall.
Right, just like a picture,
Yep. All right. So what are little things? Because I hear these stories on other podcasts and other shows, and it depresses you and it beats you down. But what are little things that average John Q consumer can do to help out? And I don't want to join a group. I don't want to get emails, but just what are little things? Like we do the reusable shopping bags when we go to the grocery store.
Right.
What are the things?
Well, I mean, I think, and this is an old idea, but I mean, the whole idea of carpooling, of instead of everybody having their own car, to share in that experience. So there's, less cars out on the highway with the emissions. I know that the standards, the EPA standards for emissions, continue to get tighter and tighter. And so that's, forcing industry to adapt to that. I mean, there are probably a lot of other like little things that I'm just not thinking of at this particular moment. But I think, probably one of the best things you can do is to encourage dialogue between these two right now, very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very, very contrasting camps. And, realize that just because somebody feels differently about an issue than you do doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them un-American or unpatriotic. That we all have something to contribute. And it could very well be, if we just talked, that we could actually come up with solutions that would be at least a partial win-win, that both sides would get a little bit of what they're looking for.
Yeah. But, that's not going to drive the cable news ratings, Greg.
No, it's not.
And I remember, in the days before cable news, you'd have the election would be a couple of months before November. And maybe you wanted Reagan, maybe your neighbor wanted Dukakis. For a month or so, it was a little, And then after that, I was like, all right, let's move on.
Right.
And now it's just, it never stops. It's the endless campaign.
Now I do know, I'm not getting compensated for this, but I went to see the movie Oppenheimer a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
In my mind, it's one of the top 3 movies I've ever seen. And I learned a lot. There were a lot of things that I didn't know. And certainly, like, back during the McCarthy era, there was some pretty big division, over some topics back then. But I'm just not sure that it necessarily got all the way down to basic society level the way it has now.
Yeah.
That's what scares me, and I really hope, and I'm sure people are going to think, I'm being melodramatic when I say this, and I don't mean to, but I really hope that we're not heading into whatever the 21st century equivalent is of a civil war, because it seems sometimes like that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I hope not.
I hope not.
Well, like, something I really love is Star Trek. One of my favorite shows ever is Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Mhm.
There are bad episodes of that show. And I recognize that, and I understand. And, someone else might like that episode. I might love an episode they don't like, that kind of thing. But, we don't hate each other because
Right.
we acknowledge, hey, there's bad episodes of this show we like.
Right.
And, we've got to get that back into politics. It's like, I like this guy, but I don't agree with what they did there, or this woman, or what they did.
Right.
But on the whole, social media, cable news is killing us all. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast page on Facebook, everybody.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I'm kidding.
Exactly. And I guess the only way or only place I can get away from that is, I've been a huge New York Mets fan for 55 years now, and there's a lot of people who do podcasts about them, and there's nothing political about that. I mean, the Mets are either doing well or they're not doing well. Yeah, I really hope that, that we can get to the point where we can at least have, civil exchanges and again, recognize. In fact, I used to give a talk when I went out and talked to civic groups and that type of thing. And the title of it was "The Scientific Method is Not Just for Scientists." And my argument there is that it's okay to have a hypothesis. Everybody's entitled to that. But step 2 is testing the hypothesis. And in theory, the best way to test a hypothesis is to try to prove it wrong.
Yep.
And only upon failing to do that do you accept your hypothesis as your conclusion. And I think we're skipping step 2.
Yep.
We're going from hypothesis to conclusion because it's too much trouble to do the testing, and we might find out that we were wrong about something, and we can't have that.
Nope. A civil conversation is much better than civil war.
It really is.
One more time, I want to mention that your forecasts on Patreon that people can subscribe to.
Yes.
And I'll make sure I put links in the podcast notes and everything.
Yeah, if you just go to patreon.com/fishweather, all one word. There's a couple of different levels, a $3 a month level and a $5 a month level. And I tried to make it very affordable, but at the same time, I try to, put things in there that you're not going to get on, basic television and so forth, especially the $5 level where we really delve into the science behind everything. Anybody that at least gives it a shot, if you give it a shot and you find that you're not using it or you just, don't really like it, then that's your choice to cancel, but I sure would appreciate it, at least giving it a try for a month or so and see what happens.
All right. Well, Greg Fishel, I know it was kind of a scattered conversation. We covered a lot of different gamuts, but the main thing, if the oceans rise, everyone sort of says they'll come down and look and say, okay, good, my house is okay. Not realizing there's a lot of other houses that aren't going to be okay. But
that's exactly right. I was just going to say, is it okay if I end this with a funny story that I heard recently, which is a little bit of a cerebral joke?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So Einstein's on an airplane sitting next to this gentleman, and he turns to him and he said, it's a long flight. Why don't we have a little competition? I'll ask you a question. If you can't answer it, you give me $5. You ask me a question. If I can't answer it, I'll give you 500. So the guy thinks, well, that's a pretty good deal. So Einstein goes first and he says, how far is the Earth from the moon? And the guy thinks about it a little bit and he can't come up with anything. So he gives Einstein $5. Then he asks Einstein, what goes up a hill with 3 legs and comes down with 4? And Einstein racked his brain. He couldn't come up with anything, so he gave the guy $500. Now it's Einstein's turn again, and he said, before I ask you my next question, what does go up the hill with 3 legs and comes down with 4? And the other guy reached in his pocket and gave him $5.
Now, which Patreon level gets the puns and the humor?
Oh, both of them.
All right, well, Greg Fishel, thank you so much. It was great catching up with you, and take care of yourself.
Absolutely, and we'll stay in touch.
All right, yes, sir.
All right, take care.
Take care, bye. My thanks again to Greg Fishel. I want to add a few simple things average people can do to help reduce our carbon footprint. Carpooling when possible is a good thing, but admittedly it's not always possible in a place like Cary where the suburb is king. But we do have the Go Cary transit system. Reusable grocery bags are a good thing. Instead of having to carry in 10 plastic bags, we carry in 4 reusable bags after my wife and I make our weekly grocery store run. If you routinely eat lunch at work and are constantly using plastic forks and spoons, bring in a reusable silverware set and wash it instead of throwing out plasticware each day. And a no-brainer is to try and reduce your home energy usage. If no one is in a room, make sure the lights are off and switch to energy-efficient light bulbs. That'll save you money on your electric bill, too. Turning off cable news isn't a bad idea either. If you just want background noise, turn on some music. So one more special treat in honor of Greg Fishel. As many of you know, he is quite an accomplished tuba player. Many years ago, when I was still at WRAL-TV, one Christmas we got a CD of Greg's old band, the Triangle Tuba Quartet, playing some holiday songs. I figured it was only fitting for Greg to play Let It Snow. A reminder that if you'd like to get Greg Fishel's weather forecast videos, you can sign up for his Patreon page. Just go to patreon.com, patreon.com/fishweather, all one word. You can choose the $3 or the $5 a month level. This guy has been studying the weather in central North Carolina for over 40 years, so he knows his stuff. I'll post a link in the show notes. Give it a try for a couple months. If you want to contact us here at the podcast, you can send an email to carypodcast@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on the Cary Podcast's Facebook group page. Just search for The Cary Podcast on Facebook. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, carry on.
The Cary Podcast is a private entity, not officially affiliated with the town of Cary. All guest opinions are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Cary Podcast, its participants, affiliates, or advertisers. Theme music provided by Saints Apollo. Find their albums at iTunes and on Bandcamp.com. Matthew Corey is the author of the novels Remember the Roller Dogs and Cue Me, My Star Trek Story, both available at Amazon.com. And also, special thanks to Jimmy Benedict. This is Ted Harrison saying thanks for listening, and join us again next time for the Cary Podcast.